Hey, I'm Mike Farrington. Welcome back to the boardroom. In this video, I'm going to build a door jamb that I'm going to hang and install the door that I built in a previous video. Step 1 is selecting appropriate lumber. Step 2 is to make the best cuts possible to remove defects. This crack is known as a check. It's a common part of the lumber drying process. These will tend to grow if they're not addressed. Another common lumber issue, it's not technically a defect, is sapwood. In this case, I'm using cherry, and the sapwood is lighter in color than the heartwood. I like to cut as much of this away as possible, which means I need to remove a little from each side of this board. I get one edge usable at the jointer, then it's off to the bandsaw where I rip both edges. Okay, just to clarify, I'm milling lumber for the door jamb right now. This is a fairly tough job. I need wide, long boards that are reasonably clear. This requires a good amount of thought when milling to make sure that I get the pieces that I need. A little more sapwood at the edges. I'll plane this side when bringing the board down to thickness. That should remove the last little bit. Also, it's not necessary to fully joint a board to prep it for planing. This is good enough. With masterfully prepped lumber ready to go, I break out my clamping platen. This is just some LVL framing lumber that I've glued up, trued up, and ensured that it is very flat. This makes for a great place to laminate two pieces of lumber together. I need to build up thickness, so laminating is really my only choice. Without a reference surface, it's easy to clamp a slight curve when laminating two pieces together. This platen helps avoid that. Using Type on 3 for longer working time and water resistance. Laminating provides another opportunity to hide defects. I like to flip boards around to give me the best look. This glue up is shorter than the others because it's the head jamb. Here's a look at what I have thus far. The thicker ones with 3 plies are actually the hinge and strike jambs. All of this will make more sense as the video drones on. I clean off one edge with the jointer, then on to the mighty table saw for the opposing edge. This gives me 2 clean faces, 2 clean edges. I true up the ends and cut to length at my newly installed sliding table attachment. Alright, let's take a look at our shop drawing. Yes, I did this all myself. So there are 4 uprights, 2 inner and 2 outer jambs. And then we have this sus dude creeping in the corner. Close-up of the 4 uprights. Joinery starts with some big old rabbits. The sidelights and door will be housed in these. If you're concerned about seeing the glue lines of the laminations, all of these are easily covered up with moldings. The seams on the outside jambs will be covered up by casing both sides. I make a mock-up of the weather stripping. This is a bulb style. I find these work really good in windy climates like the one I live in. They're press fit into a 1/8 inch kerf. I use the mock-up to confirm how much space I want to leave when the door is closed. I end up going with 3/8. Quick run through the wide belt sander just to clean things up a bit. Now it's off to the shaper for rebating. The first pass will be a shallow one. This will ensure that the edge created is crisp with no tear out. The weird red thing that's pushing the wood past the cutter is called a power feeder. If you're unfamiliar, it's pretty much a roller blade with a motor. It's nice because it keeps my nose pickers away from the cutting action. More importantly though, it keeps constant pressure on the workpiece, making for more consistent cuts. After the first pass, I adjust the fence to 2 3/8, and this measurement comes from a 2-inch thick door and 3/8 inch for the weather stripping, and the other dimension is 1/2 of an inch. Here's a close-up of the first cut versus the second cut. This is one of the middle 2 uprights. One rebate is for the door, the other is for the side light. At this point, I've rebated all the needed pieces, 2 centers, a left and right, and a top. Alright, speaking of top, back to the creepy sus dude drawing. The top needs some joinery cut. I don't know if these are rabbits, dados, or grooves or what, but they need to be cut either way. And I know my top needs to be cut to a 64-inch max. The outside two cuts are pretty easy to lay out. The center two are a little more tricky. I find center, I lay out 18 inches on either side for a total of 36, which is the width of the door. But the key here is that the 36-inch width is to the narrower portion of that jamb because the door closes against that wider part. Off to the mesa saw. I have a dado set up and ready to roll. I also have my fence set up as a stop so I hit my marked line. Next up are the two middle cuts. On one side I have a flip stop set. On the other I have my fence set. This is a good way to do the cut because I can cut both of them by flipping the board around, but I know that the cuts will be symmetrical. Here's a look at how things come together. One thing to note, I'm forced to leave some material remaining. The reason is that the pointy tips on the dado stack would leave little itty bitty grooves, so some handwork is needed to finish things off. Because the door is already made, I like to assemble the jamb, which is the name of my new band, by the way, and mark everything out on it. So I have the door height minus the top reveal, which will be cut away later. I have space for the door sweep, space for the threshold, and the rest of the material needs to be cut off. At some point, I realized that I forgot to rabbet the lower left and right sills, so I did that. I also added a bevel to help water drain. This door has a roofline over it, but snow could blow and collect on these areas, so some drainage is a pretty good idea. This is an example where I don't quite know what I was thinking. I should have done this with a blade and made two cuts. Instead, I did this wacky thing here with the dado stack. This isn't particularly accurate and it's not any faster. I'm going to go ahead and assume that I did it this way because the dado was in the saw and I didn't feel like changing it out. Now it's time to lay out for the side lights. I want the rails of the side lights to line up nice and tight with the rails on the door. So once I have this layout complete, I know what size parts I need, so I begin laminating more pieces. Fast forward a bit, here are the completed laminations. I've left the rails long. I'll cut them in half later. Leaving them long just makes for easier machining. First operation is to cut a groove. The groove is sized to match the 5/8 inch chisel on my hollow chisel mortiser, which will make sense later in the video. I clamp a 1/2 inch shim on, so the first cut's just a skim cut. After the second full depth pass, I lay out for some mortises. On to the mortiser. I set depth first. The upper line is the length of the tenons. The second line is how deep I'd like to set the mortiser. I like to overcut my mortises a little bit so there's no interference during assembly. Next move is to center the bit in the groove. Then it's just a matter of stomping my foot until all the mortises have been cut. Alright, now it's time for some tenons, but I can't cut the tenons until the rails have been cut to size. Back to the shaper. For this setup I have two tenoning discs spaced apart so they cut the perfect tenon in one pass. I have a backer board to stop blowout, and I'm using the flip stop to set the length of the tenon. This is a really fun and efficient way to cut tenons. Final step is to cut away some material. Here's how you know I'll never be a good YouTube woodworker. I was looking at the screen on my camera while doing this. I wanted to make sure the shot was centered. I guess that is harder than it looks. Alright, you'd have to admit at least my actual cutting is better than my marking. Back to the mortiser, this time with a 1/4" bit installed. This mortise is for the window muntin, which is a word that sounds gross because it's too close to the word mutton, which is a gross food. Now the tenons for the gross muntins. Now it's time for some center panels. I wanted these to be one piece. I didn't want to have to edge glue for width. So I pulled a couple of special boards from my super secret collection that I had set aside just for this purpose and milled them up. The tenon discs from earlier aren't just for cutting tenons, they cut rebates as well. So I get my measurements all dialed in and get to cutting. I'm not sure if this is considered a raised panel, but it's pretty much the same idea. I'm leaving the panel at whatever the thickness was that it came out of the planer, and I'm cutting a tongue to fit into the 5/8" groove. Double taper sanding disc for the win. Being able to cleanly sand the edge of a workpiece and not affect joinery is such a help on this type of project. After sanding, I glue up a big pile of parts into a very nice Sidelight. Once dry, I trim off the ends and a pass through the wide belt sander to remove the excess glue. Shifting gears, time for the most critical part of the project, cutting in the hinges. This is a door buck, helps hold the door vertical. And this T-shaped jig is one that I made. Actually, I've made a few for different applications. I have found this jig works super good. It makes it way harder to mess this up. And it allows me to cut the jamb and the door in one operation. With the door clamped in the door buck, the jig clamped to the door, the jamb clamped to the jig, I get to routing. My bit is comically dull, so it leaves burn marks. No big deal, they'll be covered up by the hinges. Square hinges need square openings, no problem. I use the jig as a chisel guide. And then with the corner square, I drop the hinge in place and use a Vicks bit to start the pilot holes needed. I only start them because I don't have the correct size Vicks bit. I finish off the holes later on with the correct size. If you've ever cut in hinges, you know the sense of achievement that I'm feeling right here. This scary looking cut is for the weather stripping. This operation would be better done at the shaper. I should have a blade bored out to 1 1/4 inches so I could mount it in my shaper. I'm going to put that on the to-do list. Next tedious task is to make some moldings to hold the glass in place. I normally don't do it this way. This is a bit of a test for me. I'm cutting a tiny lip that will cover up the edges of the opening. This is a little more work versus just having moldings sit inside the opening, but I think it makes for a cleaner look. These moldings really need to be butt joints, so the moldings can be removed easily should the glass need replacing. And here's a quick look at the final result. Not too bad. More moldings to hold those side lights in place. Bit of a spring fit on that last one. Here's a favorite pro tip of mine. A biscuit joiner can be used to cut grooves. So I need a groove that's about 9/16 of an inch deep and 3/4 of an inch wide. The door is 2 inches thick, so I don't have a router bit that will reach down far enough, even if I cut in from both sides. This door is big and heavy, so taking it to a tool is really not the best solution. My opinion, this is the best technique for the task at hand, not just a wacky trick for, YouTube clicks. I am a big fan of these door sweeps. I like that the 2 fins are silicone and that they're easily replaceable without removing the door. Just making sure I have the right amount of projection. Adding a back bevel so the door closes without interference. And of course, the shop a princess, who's now 5 all of a sudden, must come in after school to scare the excrement out of me. I felt the need to show you that I installed the lock set. The video felt incomplete without it. For the threshold, I went with a prefabricated unit. I've made thresholds out of wood before, and they just get too beat up too quickly, especially with little crumb crunchers, running around the house constantly. This one has a foam core so it won't rot, which is cool. I cut the jamb at the same angle as the threshold, if that makes sense. I leave like a 3/8 or ½ inch gap. I don't like making this too tight in case the threshold ever needs to be removed. All right, more shameless, never-ending self-promotion. Back to the double taper sanding disc to clean up the edges. Check the links below if you'd like one for your shop. These pieces needed to be done by hand. 2 rabbits mean I can't run it through the table saw. All right, sometimes a hand plane is actually the fastest tool for the job. Sanding these undulations out is just too slow. Now these are caused by the oscillation of the sanding belt on my wide belt sander. Of course, there's a way to avoid this with the sander, but that's a maintenance issue that I need to fix, and that's probably better saved for another video. Cleaning up parts with a hand plane is fun for sure. Taking wispy, thin shavings does require a very sharp blade. A good way to sharpen all your common plane blades and chisels is with my new sharpening jig. Works totally awesome, it's fast and easy, and it's for sale on my website if you'd like one. I have a video on my channel which goes into painful detail if you'd like more info. Okay, time for some finishing. I'm using a spar urethane. I don't think that's the best finish for an entry door, but it's not bad. A little while back, my home state of Colorado outlawed many of the better finishes, so I'm limited in selection. A couple things to note: I apply finish to all end grain in areas that will be covered by joinery. Next, I get as much finish on the panel tongue as possible. I'm using urethane glue. It's waterproof enough. Oh, and look at that, built-in song recommendation. It's waterproof enough and it's chemically similar to the finish I'm applying, so squeeze out doesn't really show too bad. All right, listen up, pay attention. I'm pointing with a pencil, so this must be important. This is the first area where finish will fail. This is an area where water can really work its way in. My solution here is to thoroughly cover this area with glue. This will help keep moisture out as best as is possible. I spray 4 coats, both on the door and jamb. This should give about as good a protection as can be expected for an exterior finish. Alright, stuff is dry, so I glue the threshold in place. I use my hulking strength to bend open the jamb just enough to squeak it in place. I shouldn't be shocked by this stuff anymore, yet here we are. As I'm doing the demo, I'm looking around for screws or nails to remove. I find none. Spray foam and casing was the order of the day when this sucker was installed. However, I found exactly 1 3-inch screw at the top hinge, so at least there was that. I lay the jamb gently into a cozy bed of adhesive. I get one corner as plumb as I can and I partially drive in a screw. From there, I spend a buttload of time checking and shimming and shimming and checking and doing it all over again. Once I'm happy, I begin screwing. Unlike the last guy, I really like the feel of a door that's solid, so I go for lots of screws. Oh, and I'm positioning these so the side lights will cover them. To pop in the side lights, I use some big stretch adhesive. I really like that stuff. It goes on white, it dries clear. I pay special attention to the bottom, just enough to cause a little bit of squeeze out. I want that to be watertight down there. Same adhesive for the glass. I'm far less worried about things being watertight here as the roofline keeps this area dry. Couple pins hold things in place, yet are easy to remove should the need arise. I think this weather stripping is great, forms a nice tight seal. I really hate this stuff when I'm about 90% done installing it. It takes a bit of force to press it in place and my delicate little fingers start to hurt. So I need to come up with a pressing tool or something. Pro tip, a single dot of glue will hold the sweeps in place, yet still be removable. Alright, another pro tip, save the lids from spray paint cans. They make great epoxy mixing bowls. At this point, I was happy to have the house airtight again. My wife was at the point where she was asking every 5 minutes when she could turn the heater back on. Alright, no more mentions of the sanding disc. This is getting out of hand. So I make up some basic casing for the outside and the inside. Simple, flat, easy peasy. Add a little round over to it, sand it, and it's ready to go. I add a back bevel to make scribing easier, and I use some blue tape as my scribe marking surface. I don't know what happened, but I didn't film myself cutting to my scribe line. So here's a reenactment. I make sure my piece is clamped firmly. I use my power planer, and I just slowly remove material until I'm down to my line. Alright, at some point I picked up a P-Zeta thingy, whatever it's called, from Lamello. For this type of work, there is nothing better. Cut the slots in the shop, assemble the frame inside, and boom. I end up using less and smaller nails, which to my eye is just totally awesome. Alright, I popped the casing in. I used some 23 gauge pins and a few toed in screws to hold it in place, and this project's done. I'm pretty happy with the end results. Not too shabby, if I do say so myself. Building a properly functioning door is a challenge, to be sure. I am a fortunate guy to be able to tackle this, and it really is a pleasure to be able to share it with you. So, thank you very much for watching. Till next time.